Good morning. This is Darlene at the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Want to welcome everyone for joining us this morning for our Wisconsin Sexual Assault Kit Initiative webinar. And if you have any questions or comments as things are going along, feel free to put those into the comment box. But we're going to go ahead and get started with Keeley Crowley from the DOJ.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for everybody joining us this morning to talk about the Wisconsin Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, otherwise known as SAKI, as you will see up on your screen today. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and be here with the folks at WCASA who have been a tremendous partner to us over the past several years in this initiative. And as I said, for you all joining us today, for your interest in this topic, we really do appreciate it. So to give you a little bit of a background on where we started with this issue, we're going to go back a couple years to the creation of the Attorney General's Sexual Assault Response Team. In December of 2012, then Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen created the AG SART team, which at the time was composed of appointed members representing the four systems most often responsible for responding to survivors of sexual assault. This is probably going to look like, hopefully mirror the sexual assault response teams in your communities that have representation from the medical community, most likely a sexual assault forensic examiner or a sexual assault nurse examiner, community-based advocacy, law enforcement, and prosecution systems. In addition, for us with the AG SART, because of our proximity to them with the Department of Justice, we are also very fortunate to have representation from our crime lab on the committee as well, and their input and expertise has been invaluable to us. When the AG SART was initially incorporated, some of the issues that needed to be addressed focused on the transmittal, storage, and processing of forensic evidence that was collected during a SANE exam. And specifically, some of those issues included the composition of medical forensic collection kits. At that time, there was no uniform kit that was utilized by all the SANE programs in the state to collect evidence during a SANE exam. Some hospitals were buying them from private vendors. Some hospitals were buying them from our crime lab. Some hospitals were putting together their own kits. And while that worked well during that time, we thought it would be easier to have something that was used by all the SANE programs in the state. So a lot of SANE nurses got together with representatives from our crime lab and developed a kit that is now provided free of charge to all the hospitals conducting SANE exams around the state. That they are produced by our crime laboratory. The cost is absorbed by the Department of Justice, and like I said, provided free of charge to hospitals. This is also in compliance with the Violence Against Women Act requirement that no survivor can ever be charged for that kit collection. So that was a tremendous success coming out of that committee. That's been in place for at least a year, I'm guessing close to 2 years. So a really, like I said, a good product coming out of that work group. In addition, they wanted to look at the billing practices. The sexual assault forensic exam funds, as well as crime victim compensation, are administered out of the Office of Crime Victim Services with the Department of Justice. And for survivors who are looking for some resources to cover the costs of their exams, those two funds are there and available. And they wanted to make sure that the way that hospitals were billing those funds were, again, consistent and uniform, and how we were reimbursing for costs and what were reimbursable costs were uniform. So that was something that committee looked at as well. We also wanted to look at the accumulation of the unsubmitted kits around the state, and I'm going to skip over that a little bit right now because that's what we're going to be talking about for the majority of the morning. So if you can kind of just keep that one on the back burner, but that's definitely something that committee really wanted to look at it as well. And finally, they wanted to look at the provision of care process starting when a patient presents at a healthcare facility, and really kind of create an option for a patient who wasn't necessarily wishing to report to law enforcement at the time. For those of you who are advocates listening that maybe have accompanied a survivor to a SANE exam, to a hospital for a SANE exam, or if we have possibly some SANE nurses on the call who conduct the exams, I'm guessing you know that there are some survivors when they report to the hospital after an already traumatic assault that they really don't know what they want to do. It's a pretty big decision deciding whether or not to even report to a hospital, to step forward and identify yourself as a sexual assault survivor, to receive services, to engage with advocacy, to engage with law enforcement. Those are really big decisions to make, and like I said, on top of an already traumatic assault, can be kind of overwhelming. So the AG SART wanted to say, what ways can we create a process so that we're going to give survivors as many options as possible when they're reporting for a SANE exam. So they came up with a protocol for some options for those survivors. Excuse me. That first option, maybe you're going to have a survivor who comes in and they really just have absolutely no interest in reporting to law enforcement. I think we could all agree that the decision to report to law enforcement is a significant one because the criminal justice system is not always very friendly to survivors. Even under the best of circumstances, it's a long journey when you get engaged with the criminal justice system, and some survivors may just decide that that is not the route they want to take, that that is not the best option for them. But they still want to report to a SANE program because maybe they want some medical attention. Maybe they just want to make sure that physically they're okay. They might want to make sure that they're not at risk for contracting a sexually transmitted infection from their perpetrator, or that they're not pregnant as a result of their assault. With that option, they will come in, and I think I hear, I know that I hear SANE nurses speak all the time, that that person walking through that door, to them first and foremost is their patient, that they are there to provide that medical care for. So that survivor has that option to get that medical forensic exam. They can choose not to have any law enforcement involvement. With that, no forensic evidence would be collected, and therefore there would be no kit to test. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you may have somebody who says, absolutely, I do want to report to law enforcement. I want my crime investigated. I want somebody held accountable for it. I'm ready and willing to participate, excuse me, however I can. That person, again, is going to come in. They're still going to get the same medical attention and treatment as anybody else, again, making sure physically they're okay, looking at any STI prevention, pregnancy prevention. But then they're also going to have that forensic evidence collected, a kit collected. Law enforcement will be contacted to come and take a report. Again, that full participation, that kit would be sent then to the crime lab for testing. So you have kind of those two spectrums where people really definitely know what they want to do. They know that they don't want to report or they do want to report. But in the middle there's a lot of people who fall who say, you know what, I just don't know what I want to do. And I think we can all understand that that's why that's probably very common. Again, the trauma of an assault, much less deciding whether or not who you want to engage with and what decisions you want to make, can just be really overwhelming at that time. Excuse me. So what we want to make sure is we offer options and choices to that survivor. Those options can include still getting that medical forensic exam, again, physically making sure they're okay. Now with this third option, they can still have the kit collected. They can have their evidence collected by a SANE nurse. They can have the sexual assault kit collected. In the past, this may still have been an option for some folks, and maybe law enforcement would come and collect a kit and look at it as a quote-unquote Jane Doe kit, that they would just take it into their possession to maintain the chain of custody, but they wouldn't take a report. They wouldn't pursue an investigation. They would just maybe take the kit and store it in their evidence room or their evidence lockers. Perhaps they collected the kit and the SANE nurse just stored the kit at the hospital somewhere. Again, there was no uniform procedure around the state. It really did vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But what we wanted to do is make, again, a uniform process for people to be able to have that third option of having their kit collected, but not necessarily filing a police report right now because they just weren't ready. What we know is that, if somebody says, I'm just not ready to report now, but I might want to talk to them in a week or two, for them to come back for an exam in a week or two, what the nurse is able to collect from them as far as evidence at that time is really going to have a significant difference, right? Any amount of time that has passed, that they have showered or bathed or gone to the bathroom or eat or drink or brush their teeth. Any stuff like that can really understandably diminish the evidence that could be collected. So survivors now presenting to an emergency room who don't know what they want to do have the option to have their kit collected, not report to law enforcement, but have the same nurse send their kit directly to the state crime lab to be stored, not to be tested, but to be stored for up to 10 years, which is the statute of limitations on second and third degree sexual assault. To accomplish this, Department of Justice, our Division of Law Enforcement Services, who has jurisdiction, I guess you could say, over our crime lab, had to change the rules of the crime lab so that it permitted the submission of kits from the same programs. Prior to that, the only entities that could submit evidence to the crime lab was law enforcement agencies, and they could only submit evidence that was part of a reported crime. That is still the case if evidence is going to be tested. The only people that can submit, again, to the crime lab for testing of evidence is law enforcement. But there is this option now for SANE programs to submit directly to the crime lab for storage. If that survivor comes back at any point, whether it be 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later and says, now I'm ready to make a report, they can then go back to law enforcement, make their report. Law enforcement can now contact the state crime lab, find the kit that's associated with that case, with that survivor, and go ahead and proceed with their investigation and have possible DNA evidence that they would not be able to have obtained 2 years ago. So it's a really, like I said, I think a great thing that systems came together to put in place, again, to give survivors options. And I think, you know, we all know that that's one of the most empowering things that we can do for survivors is to give them options and let them be more in control of what happens to their scenario and their cases. With that, we wanted to develop, again, a form that accompanied that process to really give survivors kind of a step-by-step outline of their options. Again, you know, as people are telling you stuff in the midst of crisis, it's really, you know, easy to forget what somebody told you. I think we can, you know, maybe I'll agree that some of us probably have already forgotten what somebody told us yesterday, much less when you're sitting in an ER after a sexual assault. So we have a medical forensic exam with evidence collection, information, and options form, which I know is probably the longest title of any document, and probably took us a good, 6 months to finally decide on that, but we wanted to be reflective of what we were offering. So this form comes with the packages that are sent to the hospitals for when they package up a sexual assault kit and send it back to the crime lab. But we do hope that they're going to do these with all survivors because it does give them information. At the top of that form, you'll see that it gives them information, again, on the resources available through OCVS, specifically crime victim compensation and the SAFE Fund. Crime victim compensation is a resource for survivors who are engaging with law enforcement and cooperating in the investigation, participating in the investigation. And the Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Fund is a resource for survivors who have chosen not to engage with the criminal justice system. We've heard, you know, just really tragic stories of people who have said in the past that they chose not to have an exam done because they felt that the cost was prohibitive. And we just want people to really understand we never want that to be an obstacle for people to feel that they can't have an exam done because there's no resources for them. So please, if your program or if you're anybody who is in any kind of provider role, if you do not have information or if you're not familiar with Crime Victim Comp or SAFE, the phone number for OCVS is on there. I would encourage you to reach out to our office. I am really proud of the work that my coworkers do. Karen Moore with the Sexual Assault Forensic Exam Fund and just a whole wonderful unit with our Crime Victim Comp team. To reach out, they have resources, they have brochures, they can come train your staff. Please take advantage of that so you know what you can offer to survivors as well. On the bottom of that page, we have a detailed list kind of advocacy services. And hopefully with the SART response, the advocate will be there in the ER with the senators, explaining and going through these options in this process with the victim, the survivor as well. But it really kind of lists there that if the survivor chooses to engage with the advocacy, kind of going forward, what they can all offer. They will also then maybe talk about follow-up after the exam, after she leaves the hospital, and establish a time that it's safe to maybe follow up with them and call and just see how they're doing. At that time, they'll ask again, is it if they don't answer, is it safe for them to identify themselves or leave a message, and just write down on the form for the survivor to take with them that yes, I can expect a call from this person, this advocate at this time, and here are maybe some of the things that she's going to go over with me. On the back of the form, there's some information on deciding whether or not to report to law enforcement. This form, I think we've had some feedback in the past where it may sound very pro-reporting. Again, that's why it's so important for advocates to be able to go over this form and really talk about the options, kind of both the pros and cons, so that survivors, again, feel informed when making a decision of whether or not they want to report. And at the bottom, it also talks about their options for the exam with evidence collection. Right there at the top, it says, yes, absolutely, I want my evidence collected. I want to report to law enforcement. Law enforcement responds to the hospital. Here's the case number of my case, so that if I want to follow up, I know what I need to refer to get to law enforcement. Talks about then as well, that third option. I'm not sure if I want to report, but I do want my evidence collected, understanding that evidence collection will be then sent to the crime lab, where it will be stored for up to 10 years. We do want survivors fully to understand that at the end of that 10 years, they will not be contacted by the crime lab to let them know that their kit is going to be destroyed. Because a sexual assault kit is only identified by a barcode. The crime lab has no way to access information about that survivor. It's completely anonymous, and just logistically would not have the resources to call everybody after their kit was going to be destroyed. I think also it's a really victim-centered process to have is that if somebody has chosen not to re-engage over that 10 years, we certainly don't want to go back after 10 years and say, hey, guess what? We're destroying your kit that was collected 10 years ago, when maybe in their current time frame of where they are in their life, they have chosen to move on. They've chosen not to re-engage. Maybe people in their life at this time don't know about their assault. Again, we don't want to insert ourselves when they have chosen not to re-engage and have the kit tested. Initially, this form said that if they wanted to have their kit tested and possibly pursue an investigation, again, that they had to notify the crime lab within 10 years. That has changed to 9.5 years because we want to make sure that we're giving law enforcement and prosecutors a realistic time frame, that if there is the opportunity to pursue an investigation or prosecution, that they need to have some time to be able to do that. Certainly, they would be very limited if somebody came forward and their, the statute of limitations expired next week to have anything happen. So, again, all this information, we're hoping the advocate and the senators are going to be there to really go over this form in great detail so that, again, survivors know what their options are when reporting for a SANE exam. Again, going forward, I think we just look at this. We talked about the reporting options, about the kit being destroyed. One of the things I guess I'm going to kind of skip forward about that we're going to talk a little bit more about later is that some of the unsubmitted sexual assault kits that had remained on the shelves of law enforcement for so many years, a significant portion of them were these quote-unquote Jane Doe non-reporting kits where the survivor never came forward to report. Law enforcement just kind of had these kits sitting there. Again, this option to directly submit to the crime lab is going to eliminate that accumulation going forward. So I told you one of the things at the first one, talking about the AG SART, what they had to look at, it was the unsubmitted kits. So now let's just really kind of dive into the maybe the meat of the presentation that you've joined us for today, and that is looking at the unsubmitted sexual assault kits. So just so that we're all on the same page, a sexual assault kit is a kit that has not been submitted to a forensic laboratory for testing and analysis using CODIS-eligible DNA methodologies. CODIS is the combined DNA index system. That's kind of the national federal DNA database with the FBI, where if somebody is convicted of a sexual assault or other crimes, their DNA is uploaded into this big database so that if other crimes happen, they can match or test it against the DNA that's already in that system and possibly connect either unsolved crimes or serial crimes, things like that. One of the things I think is important to clarify is, we hear a lot of people kind of talking about a backlog of sexual assault kits. And the reality is we don't have a backlog in the state of Wisconsin. Many years ago when there was a backlog at the crime lab, Department of Justice invested a significant amount of money to hire on several additional DNA analysts who went in and cleared up that backlog. We have not had a backlog at our crime lab for many, many years. What the unsubmitted kits are kits that were just, like I said, they were never submitted for testing. They've been in the custody of law enforcement since they were collected from the same program. I think, when we first heard those numbers of the kits that were out there, maybe some people were really up in arms and really upset with law enforcement and saying, why didn't you submit these kits? Kind of what's wrong with you? Where was the system failure? We know there are several reasons why law enforcement, several legitimate reasons why law enforcement held on to those kits. One of them was, again, as we said, the victim, one of them that we know is that the victim reported to law enforcement. However, there was a decision made by law enforcement or the prosecutor not to test that kit. Perhaps the issue was the issue of consent. Maybe while the victim is saying, absolutely, I did not consent, he sexually assaulted me. If the perpetrator is saying, yes, I had sex with her, it was consensual, sending a kit to the crime lab to find that perpetrator's DNA is possibly not going to help solve that particular crime, because they're not going to be surprised that the DNA was found but the perpetrator is saying, well, it was consensual. At that time with the crime lab, if we look back, 10, 15 years ago, crime lab staff now will tell you kind of the culture of how they did testing was very different. If it was an issue of consent, the crime lab said, do not send that kit. That is not one that they would test. Again, for reasons that I had just kind of sent to you, of that, if they're just going to find DNA and the perpetrator says it was consensual, that really adds no value to an investigation or prosecution. If the victim did not report to law enforcement took the kit to main chain of custody, but no report of an incident. That's kind of what we've been talking about, right? Law enforcement never submitted those kits because, again, they're not going to submit a kit without victim consent. Perhaps there was already a conviction achieved without DNA. Perhaps the offender, on the opposite end of saying it was consensual, maybe he or she admitted to it and took a plea deal, pled guilty, so they didn't need to test the kit for the purpose of that prosecution. And there's also a significant number of kits that law enforcement had to hold on to while the defendant serves their sentence. There is a statute in the Wisconsin Code that requires law enforcement to hold on to any DNA evidence until an offender has fully discharged from their sentence. So if a perpetrator is sentenced to 10 years in prison, followed by 10 years of extended supervision, law enforcement must maintain that kit until the end of that full 20 years until they fully discharge from their sentence, in case there's any possible interest in pursuing an appeal of their case. One of the exceptions that we have in Wisconsin statute that we need to be cognizant of is Statute 175-405. And while we would like to be able to say with complete certainty that no kit will ever be tested without survivor consent, there is a statute that with 175 requires that any kit that was collected after July 1st of 2011, if it comes into the custody of law enforcement and there is no identified suspect, so if it's a stranger assault, for example, that kit, regardless of victim intent, must be sent to the crime lab for testing. Why this becomes a challenge and a problem for providers is that this was a very little known statute. Advocates were not aware of it for the most part. WCASA was not aware of it. DOJ was not aware of it. SANE nurses were not aware of it. So we did not know that we should be alerting survivors to this requirement. So if there were survivors that had a kit collected, did not want to report to law enforcement, but law enforcement took custody of that kit for chain of custody purposes, but without a report, they were still required to submit that kit to the crime lab. So those were one of those that, while it will help contribute to the unlikelihood of future accumulation of kits, we really need to be aware of it so that we're giving survivors as much accurate information as possible so that we can really, really hold to their determination of whether or not they want their kit collected. So the AG start looking at how we're going to proceed with really trying to understand the scope and the significance of the unsubmitted kit issues in our state. Sent out a survey in May of 2014 that asked every law enforcement agency how many kits they had in their possession at that time. It was a very straightforward survey. It was literally 2 questions. What county are you in, and how many kits do you have? And at that time, it came back that about 6,000 kits were reported around the state, and that was with about 80% participation and replies from law enforcement jurisdictions. Putting that into context, I think in the couple of years prior, I think one of the major news events that really started to bring attention to the issue of unsubmitted kits was in Detroit, when I believe they found just in the city of Detroit alone about 11,000 kits. Similar significant numbers in places like Houston and Memphis. Again, those single jurisdictions were finding thousands and thousands of kits. So in our entire state, we were looking at 6,000. We were very fortunate then going forward, again, as we're still looking like what is the best way for us to deal with these kits, because we're looking at dealing with them on a statewide issue or a statewide level. We were very fortunate in 2015 to be awarded 2 grants to really help us give us the resources to look into how we were going to deal with these kits. One of them was from the District Attorney's Office of New York, who awarded us $2 million, which is solely for the testing of the kits. That is absolutely all we can use that money for, is to test kits. And that was a tremendous resource for us as we were kind of looking at possibly thousands and thousands of kits that we were going to have tested. The second grant that we received was from the U.S. Bureau of Justice Assistance, a sexual assault kit initiative grant, which was another $2 million grant to create a sexual assault response team within the Department of Justice. And we're going to talk a little more about that later. We also use that to fund our victim outreach campaign, which Darlene's going to talk to you a little bit about later, and also for some kit testing. Again, super incredibly appreciative of these resources, and actually really proud of our state and the work that the AG SART did to kind of build a foundation about how we were going to look at these kits, because I think that process made us really competitive for these grants. And again, so we're really proud to have those grants. One of the things about the BJA grant was it did require a certified inventory be completed before we could test any of the kits. And as you may guess, they wanted a little bit more information than what our SurveyMonkey data collected. So when we looked at what BJA required of us, they required 12 data elements for every kit in the possession of law enforcement. So we began this massive inventory outreach in March of 2016, where we reached out to every law enforcement jurisdiction in the state, and we asked them, for every sexual assault kit still in your possession, going back from the time in 2015, the end of 2015 back. We wanted to know the case number for every kit. We wanted to know the date of the assault, the date the kit was collected, the date that the kit came into the possession of law enforcement. We wanted to know how old the victim was at the time of the assault. Had that victim reported the assault to law enforcement? How much time was left on the statute of limitations? Had the statute of limitations expired by this point? Was there 6 months left, 2 years left? How much time was left on that statute of limitations? And we wanted to know why that kit wasn't submitted in the first place. And so it was a lot of information that we were asking law enforcement agencies to provide. And if you're like me and we're very naive about the number of law enforcement agencies in our state and how long it would take them to complete such an inventory, I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself. That's a slide later, so I'll just get to that in a moment. But what we were proposing to law enforcement is that really most kits should be tested. That we have these resources now, and for survivors who thought their kits were going to be tested at the time, that we really owed it to them to be, kind of restore some dignity and respect to them going through that same process, that we kind of owed it to them to have these kits tested. Again, some exceptions to the testing, we're going to include those kits that were being held due to Statute 968.405, which is that DNA retention statute that were being held until the offender discharged from their sentence. Kits in where the offender was acquitted or found not guilty. Ethically, the crime lab could not test those kits, so we were not going to test those. And then also kits, again, where the victim did not report the assault to law enforcement, thus did not consent to have the kit tested. There are certain other jurisdictions which they felt what worked best for them was to implement what they referred to as a forklift method, where they were just going to test everything. And like I said, it was all due respect to their decision and what was going to work best for them. We felt in Wisconsin it was first and foremost priority to go with victims and whether or not they had consented to have their kit tested. And actually, in January of this year, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office on Violence Against Women, issued a white paper on sexual assault kit testing initiative and non-investigative kits, or what I've been referring to as non-reporting or Jane Doe kits. And what they came out and said was that it was OVW's position that submitting non-investigative sexual assault kits to a forensic lab for testing, absent the consent from the victim, should not be standard operating procedure for a law enforcement agency. And I think that's been part of our conversation all along, that if you really, if you force a victim into the system, the likelihood, if you're doing that against their will without their consent, what this paper really talked about, that again, that we had already had conversations about, is that you're not likely to really get them to want to cooperate or trust you going forward with an investigation or prosecution. So we really appreciated the experts, the subject matter experts at OVW, sharing that position. So we conducted the inventory, like I said. We got not too far into it when we recognized that if we had to wait for the entire state to finish an inventory before we started submitting them to our crime lab for processing and eventually testing, that was just going to take a really long time. So our research partner in DOJ's Bureau of Justice Information and Analysis proposed that we certify in phases. They proposed that to BJA. They were supportive and approved that. And so we went forward with dissecting the state into the stages as you see there, with phase one beginning in the southern part of the state and working up through the northwest with phases 2, 3, and 4. And basically that just meant, we really kind of focused efforts on phase 1, started getting them shipped into the crime lab, and started working through 2 and 3. Like I said earlier, I had no concept, and I'm wondering how many of you had any concept that there are 557 law enforcement jurisdictions in this state. and every one of them has completed an inventory for us. And I really do have to say how much we appreciated law enforcement's cooperation in this process. This was a lot of work that we asked them to do, and they, like I said, really stepped up and really wanted to help us with this and figure out, what kits were appropriate to go and what kits wouldn't be going for testing. Again, I thought this might be something as simple as like looking in a database and just, grabbing information out of a records management system. But it really wasn't that simple. Every one of these kits was looked at and was touched, and reports were looked at to really gain the understanding and a clear scope of whether or not that survivor reported to law enforcement, whether or not they didn't report, and just to really personalize and bring that survivor perspective back first and foremost to the forefront of what that kit all represented. Again, 100% of law enforcement agencies and 100% of hospitals finalized their inventories. And of those 5,800 kits that were total accounted for, over 3,900 of them have been designated for immediate testing. Of the kits that were not designated for immediate testing, 50% of those, again, were for those 968. So a pretty significant number, about 1,000 of them were being held because that perpetrator was already convicted and just waiting to discharge from the sentence. About 25% of them are for cases where the victim had not consented to testing. So, 500 kits where the victim had not consented to testing. We'll talk a little bit more about what we're, when Darlene talks about the outreach campaign, kind of what our hope is for those kits or what some options for those kits are. So to date, more than 900 kits have been received by the crime lab. So once the inventories were submitted, once they were certified by BJA, then the research analysts on our SAKI SART team at DOJ submitted these inventories to our crime lab. The DNA supervisors at our Milwaukee and Madison crime lab then turned around, issued letters to each local law enforcement jurisdiction, letting them know when they could then submit their kits. Again, more work had to be done by law enforcement to submit transmittal forms and all sorts of stuff, again, that they really dove in and put the research and the time into completing. Of those 900, 600 of them have been sent to Bodie Cellmark Forensics for testing, and they can receive, 200 kits per month, giving the testing demands from multiple states. I should say that we, as a state, decided that we were going to be outsourcing our kits to testing to private labs, because right now we have 3 crime labs in the state, one in Wausau, one in Madison, and one in Milwaukee. And the Milwaukee and Madison labs are the ones that test the sexual assault kits, in addition to the evidence that come from other felony crimes, whether it's homicides or kidnappings or batteries and assaults or arson or any of the other crimes that they may have evidence to test from. Those labs right now, just from current cases, are testing approximately 1,000 kits per year. So to think that we could come to them with 3,800 kits and add that to their workload just was not practical or responsible, because they just wouldn't be able to keep up with it. They wouldn't be able to, the time that it was taking for them to complete those current cases would extend, and that would cause further backups within the criminal justice system as far as investigations and prosecutions. So we really felt it was more prudent to outsource to a private lab. We had some obstacles with that of when we first put out our request for proposals for labs to help us with that testing. On the first proposal we put out, we did not get any responses because at that time the private labs were inundated with other jurisdictions, other states, other cities looking to have sexual assault kits tested as well. So that put our work plan behind a few months. But we went out again, put out another proposal, and at that time, Bodie Forensics came forward, and we were happy to contract with them to start getting these kits tested. So they have told us, again, 200 kits per month that we can send and submit, and already 600 have gone. So things are really starting to move forward. Once the inventory was complete, we pulled apart, and you can see there's some of the numbers for the top 10 counties in the state with the top 10, with the most unsubmitted kits, starting with Dane County that had 1,272, down to the number 10 with Sauk County with 120. So like I said, a little visual representation of kind of what that looks like for those counties. I mentioned earlier about the SAKI SART team that we created within DOJ, and that is composed of 2 special agents within our Division of Criminal Investigation. What we're hoping that they are going to be able to be utilized by local jurisdictions when the testing starts to happen and kits start to come back with either hits to the national DNA database, that maybe they submitted a kit and the DNA in that matches up to a serial perpetrator in Michigan, that they're going to maybe try and now want to do some, how can they solve this case by now knowing who the perpetrator is. Recognizing, again, that law enforcement has current cases that they're trying to work on, we want to be able to dispatch our agents to follow up with those law enforcement agencies and offer any kind of assistance that they might need, whether that's to help them partner on an investigation or to maybe take more of a leadership role on an investigation. Again, we just want to be able to offer them some assistance and support as they may need it. We also, and I should share because he has put in a significant amount of time, one of the positions is vacant right now that I believe they are looking to hire, but Special Agent Jeff Twing is the agent currently on, and would encourage any law enforcement or anybody that has questions about investigating quote-unquote cold case sexual assault cases, that Jeff is a tremendous resource. I would encourage you to reach out to him. Our Assistant Attorney General, Gary Luman, who is on our team, Gary is a longtime district attorney from Greene County, who joined our team in October to kind of similarly be able to reach out to prosecutors in the state, that if law enforcement reopens an investigation after the kit has been tested and now they've got to go forward with making charging decisions and hopefully prosecuting the case, that Gary can offer some resources to those prosecutors as they're moving forward. We also have a victim services specialist on the team who the responsibility for that position is just making sure that everything we do, again, is trauma-informed, is victim-centered. And if we are ever in a position where we have taken over a case to do the investigation, the prosecution, that any notification of that survivor is done in tandem with law enforcement and our victim services specialist. So that's a very integral part of the team as well. We also have a research analyst, again, with our BJIA within the department, who is just in charge. We have to collect a tremendous amount of data to report on both of our grants, as grants usually have you do, right? You have a lot of data to report. But not only are we just reporting for the sake of being held accountable for the work that we're doing, for the money that we've received, but I think a lot of the work and the data that not only we're collecting but other sites is going to be utilized to inform processes going forward. There's not a lot of information that's out there. We have the pioneers like Detroit and like Houston and Memphis, but we don't have a lot of access from places where they've done it on a statewide level. So I think the information that Chris Henning, our research analyst, is collecting and putting together and trends that he's documenting, I think are going to be tremendously helpful, again, to inform processes going forward. And then our grant also funds an assistant district attorney in the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office to be looking at cases that result from their unsubmitted kits as well. So knowing, like I said, that, certainly we want to make sure that survivors are informed and are provided options and are always at a central focus of the work that we're doing. We wanted to look at how are we going to notify survivors? How are we going to engage them and inform them of what was going on with this process? The National Institute of Justice, again, being informed by projects already out there, has shared some information. I think one of the things that we learned really quickly was reflected that they also shared was that given the limited research to date regarding previously unsubmitted sexual assault kits, empirically based best practices for victim notification have not yet been identified. But they did identify some guiding principles that because notification may be traumatic, the emotional needs of the victim must be taken into consideration. Providing victims with options and choices helps facilitate the recovery from trauma, and providing victims with options and choices may affect their willingness to participate in further investigation and prosecution. And so knowing what we already knew, just because, like I said, people having these conversations are subject matter experts within our state and have varying degrees and varying capacities that they've worked with survivors for many, many years, but also kind of having it reinforced on a national level, we knew we really had to prioritize the work that we were going to do, working with survivors. So a work group was created kind of as an offshoot from the AG SART. It was comprised of survivors, advocates, state nurses, law enforcement, prosecutors, victim witness professionals, crime lab staff, and WCASA representatives. And that group, separate of what we had later, seen with NIJ, we had kind of ourselves beginning said we needed to have some guiding principles. And we identified that absolutely we needed to try as best we could to protect the survivor's confidentiality and their privacy. We need to empower the survivor by giving them choices. And we need to respect the survivor's choice not to engage. We talked about those 500 kits that were sitting out there that the survivor hadn't reported at the time. We need to understand that at the end of this whole project, at the end of this initiative, we may still have 500 kits that won't be tested because the survivor didn't consent. And that's perfectly understandable that, the reason they decided not to report at the time may still be a very valid reason that they don't want to report now. And again, recognizing and respecting their choice not to engage with us is of very utmost importance. And certainly the emphasis on trauma-informed care and victim-centered practices. This work group also affirmed a previous decision of the AG SART that survivors would not be notified before their kit was tested. Again, that 175 statute does catch us, unfortunately, for a couple of cases, but otherwise we know that kits that have not been associated with a report to law enforcement would not be tested. And again, we felt confident in the fact that when we did this inventory, we went through every single kit to make sure that victim consent was a part of that before they went forward for testing. Another factor that we really struggled with is we don't know what the survivor was told during their SANE exam. I'm sure a lot of people, if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me reference a meeting of the AG SART where, literally somebody made a comment that not all kits were tested, and there was an audible gasp in the room from advocates and SANE nurses who had been under the impression that every single kit that was collected was tested. I've been an advocate for pretty much my entire career for, close to 20 years now. And I know at the time, every victim that I, accompanied to a SANE exam, that's what I would tell them is absolutely it'll be tested. I'm sure many of us have heard survivors say, what if they test it and if they find DNA, then I'll report to law enforcement because then maybe they'll believe me if there's physical evidence. But what we learned from prosecutors and law enforcement in the room was no, not every kit was tested. Again, maybe they did not feel it was going to add to the value of their investigation because the perpetrator said it was consensual. Or the prosecutor felt that a plea agreement could be made, so they weren't going to need it to convict the perpetrator. We don't know what the survivor was told. So now coming back to them, possibly many, many years later, It could feel like a real betrayal, understandably. I would feel betrayed if I was that survivor and now found out. So we're trying to think of, how that would impact them. Depending on when the assault occurred, the statute of limitations may have already run. So, we're not going to be able to prosecute that kid anyways, and now if we go and test it and we don't find anything anyways, have we done further damage to that survivor when nothing in their circumstances of that kit testing will change, but we have now come and brought it back up to their forefront, possibly, triggering some very intense emotions. Like I said, no guarantee anything will be found. Potentially re-traumatizing that victim for no new developments, again, could be very, very risky. And that position was affirmed by a national leader in this effort as well. In focus groups with victims, the Joyful Heart Foundation noted that some victims felt survivors should be notified before testing, so they could have input. However, this perspective was not widely endorsed by the majority of survivors or practitioners because of the potential to adversely affect survivors. And I think that's one thing, again, consistently we have also found, is that no matter what process we have developed to think, oh, this is the best way to go, there's always a potential that it's not going to be the best for some survivor, that it's going to be potentially re-traumatizing for them. And that's just unfortunately kind of the nature of dealing with the unsubmitted kits and the time that has passed. So I have been talking for way too long, so I'm going to gladly turn it over to Darlene to talk to you about, with all that information, where we proceeded to.
Thanks, Keeley. So part of the BJA grant that Keeley had mentioned also included an outreach campaign that was funded through that grant. And so looking at how we were going to do victim outreach and what that was going to look like, we hired a firm to come up with the campaign and what that was going to look like. And during that campaign, during that process, we looked at what were some of our different options and what that was going to look like. And so we asked for survivor feedback as well, and to look at what they thought of this by your side slogan and all the information that was being presented. And we looked at different demographics and different geographic locations throughout the state to get survivor feedback before we landed on the By Your Side campaign. So, yep, you can go next. So through that campaign, there's a website that was developed, but prior to that, there was 5 weeks of geo-targeted banners that were put out there for some outreach so that people could see that this was happening and how they could get more information. And so during that campaign ran from January 30th to March 31st, and during that time, there were 13,000 users, and that included 16,000 page views, which meant that some people were coming back more than once to view the page. And there, people have asked, what that looks like, from the beginning through the process. And just so to be clear, for the first 2 weeks, there were 6,100 users alone, just in the first 2 weeks, with over 7,700 page views. And so this website here gives all the information to start people out and to help survivors to see that there's information being provided and how that's going to work and where they can reach out and a lot of the information that Keeley had shared, just a very quick synopsis of what got us here. So part of that is also an 800 number that survivors can reach out to. There's also an email address, and the 800 number is routed to the Department of Justice, and this is for any survivor that has questions. So any survivor that has questions about, hey, where's my kit? Has it been tested? They can call that 800 number and hopefully get some answers to where their kit is and what that looks like. Again, keeping in mind that there's approximately 500 kits right now that are not going to be tested without the victim's consent. So, and again, if those 500 victims never call or never reach out, that's totally okay because we don't know where they are and what that looks like for them. But this essentially is for anybody that's just looking for information on where their kit is and what that looks like. And additionally, part of the online website that we have created is also a map so that they can choose which county they're in, and they can reach out and get advocacy services within their county. And in addition to that, if they don't get this far in the website or they call the Department of Justice can also make referrals to the advocacy centers out there. So for those of you that are advocates, you may get calls from someone wondering where their kit is, and you can also, refer them to that 800 number. But there's different ways to make sure that they're getting the services that they need. And again, some of them may not want to make that phone call to the DOJ, or they may not want to move forward, but this may bring up some thoughts and feelings for them and want to reach out for just some advocacy that they may have never received, or they may have received in the beginning but never followed through with advocacy services, or maybe just want to re-engage with you all. So in addition to that, there's also some campaign materials that all of you have available that you can go on the website and print those to hang in your agencies or within your community. And here at WCASA and also at the DOJ, there are posters that have been printed. So if you're interested in those, you can reach out to us and we can get you some of those. But this is, something that maybe you should familiarize yourself with as well, with the website, so that if you get phone calls or you have people reaching out to you, you're aware of what's available.
Awesome. I think what's excuse me, really exciting and that we should really be proud of. I know I'm really proud of and really appreciative of, WCASA staff has put in a lot of time and energy in making sure that this campaign really reflected what we wanted to say to survivors. And, what was exactly like Darlene said is we wanted to make sure that survivors weren't feeling pressured. Like we were saying, you have to come forward. You have to report. We need to test your kids. We need to catch these perpetrators. We wanted to make sure that they were feeling supported and empowered, and even if they just wanted to call and ask if their kid had been tested, that we could try and find that information for them. So I'm proud to say that one of the tremendous benefits of, not just being able to address this and trying to work and do what's best for survivors in our state, but a tremendous benefit, a side benefit of being involved with these grants is that we have a national training and technical assistance team guiding us and supporting our work through this whole process. Specifically, we have a site liaison that is called with the National Technical Assistance Team, that she is there for us, to be able to, I'll give her a little shout out. Her name is Amanda Young, and she's tremendously helpful and supportive, that we can reach out to her with any questions, with any materials we want reviewed, with any struggles that we're having. And she has access to this national training team that includes just experts from all around the country. I referenced earlier the Joyful Heart Foundation, the RAIN, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, Equitas, the resource for prosecutors on violence against women issues, Dr. Rebecca Campbell, right, one of the leading experts on neurobiology of sexual assault in our country, that when we, that they share with us information, and also, again, that we can ask questions of them. In that TTA newsletter in April, we were listed as a SAKI success story for this campaign, recognizing that, when we had survivors say to us that, this direct outreach right initially could be potentially traumatizing for survivors, that Joyful Heart Foundation, through survivor feedback, had talked a lot about giving survivors the opportunity to opt in. And so as long as we're doing shout-outs, we'd probably say Ian Henderson, who was supposed to be here today, and Vicki Bean, an advocate who has been on the sexual assault response team, the AG SART, since the beginning, had done a lot of research and a lot of contact with the Joyful Heart, and this opt-in concept was such a priority for them to really say you have to let survivors who have maybe chosen not to engage, give them the opportunity to reach out to you when they're ready. And I think that's exactly what this campaign, what this website does, like Darlene said, is when that survivor's ready, they can go to this website, they can look and really kind of try and digest a little bit what their options might be. So just really proud of our work, and for everybody who's participating in it, that we did receive kind of that nod to let us know that we're kind of going in the right direction. So with that opt-in, just to kind of elaborate a little bit on what Darlene had shared, is that 800 number that's listed does go to the Office of Crime Victim Services. And I really want to stress that is meant to be an information line. It is not a crisis hotline. It's not 24-hour staffed, again, hotline. It's an information line that is staffed through DOJ, Crime Victim Services, from 7:45 to 4:30, Mondays through Fridays, and a line where crime victims from all over the state call to access our crime victim compensation, to access our victim rights, our victim resource center, to access information, for other referrals to programs, to get whatever needs they might have. So we have very skilled staff answering that line. And we wanted to make sure that we were concerned that if we created a separate dedicated line just for this project, that at the end of 3 years, when the funding was over, when the grants were done, we did not want to create materials that had a line that was no longer staffed and no longer accessible out there in communities, because we felt that would just be very confusing for survivors to try and reach out to a line that was no longer in existence. So felt that DOJ's Crime Victim Services was the best place to house that line. Again, as I said, it's a resource for survivors to ask questions about their sexual assault kits or sexual assault reports. Again, seeing as we're doing this on a statewide level, we felt being with a statewide agency was the most practical way to implement this as well. If I'm a survivor and I currently live in Rhinelander, but my assault occurred in Platteville when I was in college, for me to go to my local service provider in Rhinelander and say, hey, I want to know what happened with my kit, just time and resources. An advocate in one county is not likely going to be able to contact law enforcement in a different county and get information, because law enforcement is going to be protective of that information, because of survivor confidentiality and things like that. So to reach from county to county, recognizing that where survivors their assault may have occurred and where they are now could be very different places, that recognizing that we have a team on a statewide level that if you call us as a statewide agency at OCBS, we can connect in with our SAKI SART team and hopefully be a little more efficient in being able to access the resources that we have around the state. Again, if the survivor asks that we pursue information about their sexual assault kit, the victim services specialist will gather the information, as far as where the kit was collected, where the assault occurred, any details that we can get, pass it along to one of our special agents who will then reach out to that law enforcement agency to get that information. And certainly every call, I am confident in saying that I have staffed, or going forward that our victim service specialist will staff, we refer to local programs for advocacy services and support. We value the work tremendously that local programs provide. We are not trying to compete with that by any means. We know that certainly going forward, even once a survivor finds the information they're looking for with us, they still may need support going forward. So it's a priority for us as well to connect them with their local programs. And we do that, like I said, on a very regular basis. So finishing up here, talking about a little bit about, we've got the opt-in for those folks who don't know if they want to engage, again, giving them the resources. But we also want to look at what active notification looks like. And this is something that we're really just kind of in the infancy of developing. Because this is something new to us, we really aren't in the position to be able to say best practices because we haven't done it. But again, because we are connected to these national experts who can connect us with resources from people who have been there and done that, we've been able to kind of collect some of the best practices that they've reported and look at what active notification looks like. And when I say active notification, I'm talking about post-kit testing, when the kits start coming back and there's potential DNA that has been found, or there's a CODIS hit or a potential perpetrator that's been identified. What we know from the experts that have told us is that there really is not a one-size kind of fit-all notification policy because every case is so different, right? What's appropriate for one case might be wholly inappropriate for another case. The law enforcement group was team could could offer and contribute. So we're recommending that local teams get a multidisciplinary review team together consisting of representatives from local law enforcement, prosecutors, community-based advocates, and SANE nurses. And when they have kits and results coming back to their local jurisdiction, that this small review team gets together and really look at what is going to be the most appropriate way to notify a survivor. What we do know is that they said absolutely this notification should be conducted in partnership between law enforcement and a community-based sexual assault service provider. Law enforcement to be able to explain, and I understand that this could be challenging because law enforcement that's going to be able to be tasked with doing it maybe had nothing to do with the case initially or the decision not to send the kit in for testing initially. But that law enforcement is going to have to be there to explain kind of what's happened, maybe why the kit wasn't sent, to offer, I guess, truly to offer an apology to that with that survivor, that, apologize that maybe you thought the kit was going to be sent, but it wasn't, and then to tell them kind of what the options are going forward, kind of what the current status is, and what maybe an investigation going forward would look like, and what that would mean for their participation. And certainly we want an advocate there as well because we know it's essential that this could be very traumatizing to hear this information. And so we want the advocate to be there to assist with the explanation, to offer support, to discuss options, and just be a resource for them going forward. I think it's really important for agencies, again, to designate staff. Again, start talking about this now with your teams. We're also hoping to come out and really want to come out and start visiting SART teams so we can explain this whole process, so we can go through some of these notification processes that we've collected that we're recommending. But really find staff that this is going to be something that they're going to feel comfortable with doing and that they're well trained to do. Somebody who is trained in the neurobiology of trauma, who's trained in common reactions, trauma reactions among sexual assault survivors, is understanding of victim notification procedures. And again, we're going to provide resources for folks to be able to do this. Some of the things that, like I said, with each kit you're going to have to be looking at, when will that victim be contacted? Do you contact the victim right away as soon as you're notified that a hit has been made? Or are you going to want to really sit back with the law enforcement and prosecutor? It just might so happen that they say, yeah, the hit came back, but they're still, we're confident in the decision that this investigation is not able to go forward because the statute of limitations has expired, or for whatever reason. Do you want to make sure you have all of that information before you go talk to the victim? How will the victim be contacted? Are you going to call them on the phone and let them know that you have details of developments from a case? Are you going to show up at their doorstep and try and notify them? Are you going to send them a letter? There are varying, opinions of what is the best way and what is not the best way, and it varies from community to community, and what that looks like. Again, things that you have to talk about with your team about what's best for that particular case and for that particular survivor. Again, who's going to contact the victim with law enforcement and advocacy combined? What does that look like? What will the victim be told? Really making sure that that victim has a choice. Maybe if I'm a survivor, yes, I want to know that my perpetrator was identified through a coded tip. But I don't want to know how many other people he sexually assaulted after me. So to think of those things, to really give them options about what information that they want to be told. And then certainly you're going to be hearing from us about some data collection because we want to know what your notification attempts were, what kind of, when you were able to make contact, what worked well, what didn't work well, because again, there's still a lot of data and research that needs to be collected to further inform best practices. And the more you can help us do that, the better data and information that we'll be able to have to share going forward. I would encourage you, again, our SAKI TTA providers have a tremendous amount of information. I would encourage you to look at their website, specifically under practitioner resources. They have a 12-step guide to victim notification that is tremendously helpful for us, and I think can guide some of the conversations that you want to have with your team. They also have a whole page of of archived webinars that are tremendously beneficial, so please take some time to peruse their website and take advantage of the resources that they offer as well. Kind of sending you off with a bit of a mission. Again, thank you so much for listening to us today and participating and having an active interest. I would ask that you share information about SAKI resources with your colleagues, with the clients that you serve, with your friends, your family, anybody who's going to listen. Darlene showed you where on the microsite that you can access those. And as she said, please do contact us if you would like some posters. We are hoping to, in the fairly near future, get those posters translated into Spanish and Hmong so that we are being able to offer the resources to all survivors who need to hear the information. Please start having the conversations with your SART teams about what victim notification is going to look like. You know, if we can get out, we would welcome invitations to your local team meetings to come out and go through this information with your entire team and have those conversations. Please do connect with our SAKI SART team for assistance and support if needed. I can kind of be a gateway for that right now, but to provide you with contact information. Again, we have a special agent available, Assistant Attorney General, and our research specialist. Right now, I can handle any victim services inquiries, but again, we are here to help. But we're also here to learn from you. If you have, you know, jurisdictions that maybe have done kind of these cold case cases, and you know what's really worked well, and you know what hasn't worked so well, please share that with us, because again, we are looking to learn, to continue learning all the time, and whatever we can disseminate to other partners around the state will always be tremendously appreciated. So I have my information, Darlene's information up there. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any questions or issues or comments, or if you have, you know, interest in participating on committees or task force or whatever it might be, we would love to hear from you. So I think with that, you know, turn it over to Peter and see where we go from here.
Yes, we have one question that came in. If the SANE exam is completed at a facility that serves several law enforcement jurisdictions, who decides where the sexual assault occurred and who the local law enforcement agency will be listed on the form?
That is a very good question. I would think that a possibility, I guess I will double check with this if whoever asked this question is willing to privately share your contact information with Peter, because I want to make sure that I get you accurate information. I can definitely check with our law enforcement services as well as our SANE coordinator, but I think what might be a first step is to contact your local sheriff's department, because they kind of have you know, overlapping jurisdictions throughout the county, and they might be able to give you some information instead of you having to call each and every law enforcement jurisdiction to figure out who might have it. Maybe the sheriff's department as a start might be able to kind of point you in the right direction of helping you identify that jurisdiction. I think that's, I can only imagine how frustrating that might be, and I think that's a common issue that presents itself for SANE nurses a lot, and then they're kind of sitting there stuck with a kit and not knowing who to be able to contact. So my recommendation would first be able to see if you can call the sheriff's department, and they may be able to help you narrow down what that looks like. But again, if you're willing to share your contact information for me to follow up with you, I would like to check more with my colleagues back at DOJ just to make sure I'm getting you the best information.
All right. And if anyone else has questions, please put them in the chat box or the question box.
We'll just give it a couple minutes and see if anybody has any questions, but we really want to thank you all for taking time out of your schedules today to attend the webinar, and it is being recorded as well, so we can send that out to you after today, after Peter has it ready to be sent out. And please feel free to reach out to us at any time with questions, and we really want to be a really good resource for you to understand the process and how this is going to work and what it's going to look like. And again, as Keeley said, we don't exactly have best practices for everything yet, but those are being developed, and we'd like to be a really great resource for you in working with survivors across your areas. Any other questions, Peter? Not yet? No? All right, so you have our contact information there. Feel free to, like I said, reach out to us with questions. And again, thank you for joining.